How's it going, everybody? This is Aphotics here, and today I'm going to be bringing you my official tier list as well as matchup chart analysis for Fantasy Strike. Now, first things first, we have to go into the anatomy of a tier list a little bit. A lot of modern tier lists today are going to have the best characters in the game ranked as S tier, and the bottom ones ranked as maybe D or F or something like that. The issue with that is that in game design terms, S tier should be used to denote a character that is too powerful or quite literally needs to be changed, otherwise they will ruin the game. And most games don't really have a character that fits that definition. Now, that doesn't mean a character isn't too good or couldn't use a nerf, but S tier should really be about this character can't exist in this state because the game is basically unplayable or unfun while they're there. And as far as the F tier goes, that should be a character that is so bad that you cannot conceivably win with them, maybe outside of a couple matchups or if you get really lucky or something like that. To the point where they need to be buffed, otherwise they really have no point in being in the game. And similarly, I don't think Fantasy Strike has any such characters. So, with that said, we have the A+ tier, which I'm going to use to denote quite simply the best characters in the game. The A tier, which is characters that are of a generally similar power level, but slightly a step down from the absolute best characters, typically a slightly worse matchup spread than the best characters. And then finally, within the A tier, we have the A- tier. That is going to denote characters that are generally still quite strong. However, they might have multiple slightly more problematic matchups or generally a slightly weaker spread across their matchups. Going down from there, we have B tier, both B+ and B-. These are characters that are a noticeable step down in power from the A tier characters. However, they are still completely capable of winning either in a 1v1 or team battle setting. They're completely reasonable picks, and if you think that you're the best player in a tournament, you can still expect to win with B tier characters. C tier is now 2 steps down from the top tier, and at this point, you're starting to get into questionable territory. You're going to have not only an amazing amount of skill to win with these characters, but you might also need your opponents to not exactly know what to do in order to overcome some of the problem matchups or the general matchup spread. So, how are we going to determine who belongs in what? Well, that's what the point of the matchup chart is. So, I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with this, as it has been going around for years and years now. Funny enough, this matchup chart was actually built by me many years ago for Yomi, the card game by Serlin Games. And at some point, somebody adapted it over to Fantasy Strike, and then I borrowed it back. So it has gone full circle, but now here we are. And it's very exciting that these characters actually exist in a fighting game, because initially these were just on paper. So let's go character by character. So let's look at Grave here. So any character with a positive number means that they're, on average, they have a winning matchup against the cast. Now, that doesn't mean that every matchup's winning or that they don't have some really problem matchups or some really advantageous ones. But in general, they're generally a more powerful character versus a less powerful character. So Grave at a plus 1.5 out of 12 character cast. So obviously you ignore the mirror match because that's not worth anything. So it's basically, there's 11 different opponents. So that means on average, he doesn't quite win by, a half a point, or certainly not a full point. A full point would be pretty nuts, which we'll get to later. But he just slightly winning, but basically is like the definition of an average character. Looking at across his spread, we see anything that's 6 or under is basically a match that's going to be determined by skill. So these first 3 matches here, we have Jaina at a straight up even 5-5, meaning both characters have a roughly 50% chance of winning. There's no way to get more even than this. And again, obviously this is just opinion of myself and some other top players that I consulted in making this, as well as years and years and years of experience with this game. But more or less, we've concluded that Grave versus Jaina, basically just a skill matchup. Either side can very much reasonably expect to win based on who does better. Same deal with Midori. Setsuki, he has a mild advantage where you can sort of bully her, especially in the air-to-air game with your jump B. And you have your ground super, which gives her fits when she's trying to pressure you because it forces her to really play much more cautiously and reserved than she would like to, especially considering the fact that if she gets hit by it, even if she only gets hit by the 1 damage hit, not the cinematic hit, she's now going to be under Oki pressure, and with only 5 HP and no defense, that could just kill her flat out. So even though she does fine in neutral and Grave can't really throw fireballs, can't use the wind very well, his offense is strong enough where I think there's a mild advantage there. Versus Rook, I know there's some debate about this, but I think that Grave has a sound advantage over Rook. If Grave reacts properly to Rook's jumps, make sure to sword whenever the sword is a guaranteed anti-air. Make sure to super. Make sure to not do unsafe winds or unsafe fireballs. Then I think he can pretty squarely keep Rook out unless Rook makes some hard reads and just great guesses. Versus Degray, I have it as the exact opposite, 3.5. Rook, sorry, not Rook. Jeez, I'm already messing up. Degray can't really be zoned, at least not in the long term, because the Ghost is just way too good. He also can cover ground really quickly with his jump super, meaning that even if you get space, unless you have him knocked down, you can't necessarily win safely, especially because Degray's going to keep that super stock pretty much all the time because the ground super isn't all that valuable against Grave. So it's just a hard match because Grave feels very claustrophobic and neutral. He's going to get cornered pretty easily. And once he's cornered, Degray just simply has better tools. So it's a pretty hard match. Versus Val, again, very even. Val technically has a slightly better neutral game, but with only 5 life and the very threatening ground super from Grave, it's a pretty even match. Grave also is one of the few characters that can legitimately anti-air and air-to-air Val, even if she jumps early. He can jump B or jump super, or do the slow fireball, the hold fireball, and anti-air. So he has options against her jumps where some other characters, if she reads them on a jump, she just gets 3 damage and that round's probably over. So he's got a lot going on for him that helps him out, even if he still has to deal with forward A and the cyan magenta pokes and all the nonsense that Val generally has. Geiger is an incredibly hard match. Probably his worst match, I'd say, because you don't have any real way of getting in on Geiger. You don't really have any way of dealing zoning damage. You're pretty much relying on counter-poking his forward A's with fireballs with perfect timing and trying to jump when he happens to press a button. It's all reliant on timing and chance, and it's not sustainable or easily replicable across rounds. So anytime that you win against the top Geiger as Grave, you know you had to outplay them and you had to outguess them. And that's a hallmark of a pretty hard match. Versus Lum, back to a pretty heavily advantaged matchup. Lum sucks versus the Wind. The Wind with the empowered fireballs pretty much ruins all of his items. It pushes bombs into Lum, which sucks. The empowered fireballs wreck mini Lum, so that's not much of a threat. And once you get Lum cornered with the help of that Wind, you can just do crazy amounts of pressure with fireballs, with neutral A, and you can just keep him locked down. You have the super at that point, and it's very hard for Lum to get out. He pretty much has to make hard reads, jumping over you or rolling through things with great timing. Similar vibe to what Grave has to do against Geiger. It's just a little less extreme because Lum isn't quite as restrained as Grave is versus Geiger. Versus Arg, this match is a little hard for me to gauge because back in the day, before Grave got a bunch of nerfs, this match was disastrously bad for Argarg. This is back when jump B for Grave used to knock down. It was just brutal, as well as neutral A being frame positive for Grave. That was also ridiculous on block. That was just terrible. So those two things going away really helped Arg in the match. However, I still wouldn't consider it a good match for Arg, and I do think this is more of an estimation because honestly, I don't get to play against Grave that much anymore as Arg. But the truth is the Wind still pushes Arg to the corner pretty easily. You just have to get one knockdown, which there's plenty of sources to get that knockdown. Once he's cornered, you can kind of do a similar thing that you do to Lum, where you repeatedly fireball and just bully the hell out of him. Don't give him any space to breathe. And ultimately, you just choke him out that way. Versus Quince, it's pretty even. I do think Grave might actually have a mild advantage here, but again, it's kind of inconclusive. It's very hard to say because Quince does have tools to fight against Grave. You can't really fireball him in neutral very easily because the mirror, which for some reason reflects level 2 fireballs, the empowered ones. I don't understand why that is or how that makes any sense at all, but that's how it is. So you can't really throw fireballs against him. But luckily, you have the rushdown tools to get in anyway. You just have to bait the back A, because the back A will anti-air Grave, no matter what he tries to jump in with. But you can bait it, just walk toward him, make him react. He whiffs the back A, then you can maybe just walk up and throw him. You can neutral A him. You could maybe even forward or back A him. Or you could jump slightly after and then get in that way. And once you're in, you get to bully him pretty hard. Your super's really good against him. Graves one of the few characters that doesn't just have to sit there stuck blocking against two truths if it does go up, because the super is really good, and if you get that cinematic hit, you don't have to worry about the clones ruining your day. And granted, none of that's reliable, but it's just something to consider. Against some characters, Quince can just go for like brutal amounts of chip damage or crazy damaging mix-ups that will pretty much instantly kill the opponent if they work. But luckily, Grave doesn't have it quite that bad. Versus Oni, I'm sure this one's going to be the most contested number on my chart because a lot of people would say that Oni beats Grave. I think they're all just wrong and bad, and I'm happy to play that match. But basically, Grave has the ability to mix up offense and defense such that Oni has to really adapt on the fly, and I think you can keep him on the back foot all the time. The main trick is you can't ever let him get the 4 damage super into B/ against your fireball in neutral. If you do that, it's a terrible error, and you're going to lose that round because 4 damage is just way too much to deal with. Because it's 4 damage, and you lose all your momentum on top of it. So as long as you avoid that, I think you're sitting pretty in the matchup. But, some people will debate that. Maybe it's closer to 5-5, but it's certainly not Oni advantage like some people would say. I'm very sure about that. So with all that said, where do I think this matchup spread and this total leaves Grave? Well, I believe it puts him firmly in the A- tier. It's got a positive spread. Only one matchup that's really worrying. I mean, the Degray matchup's not great either, but I mean, if you look at this, if we ignore one matchup, it's looking pretty solid across the board. And again, overall positive numbers. I think this is like the definition of like an A- tier character. Jaina. So pretty similar here actually to Grave's spread. So again, matchup with Grave, very even. It's a very intricate match, kind of hard to go over all the interactions there. But basically, both characters have chance for pressure. They both have things they could do in neutral. It's probably one of the best matchups in the game, honestly, in terms of just interesting counterplay. Versus Midori. So this match is very technical from Jaina's side, and it's easy to screw up. So actually realizing this advantage might not come very easily, especially because in our current day metagame, which I'm not really factoring into this because it's not really fair, but in our current day metagame, there's far more skilled Midoris than there are skilled Jainas. So you're probably going to see this go the other way more often than not. But that's only because there's a skill disparity there, as well as Jaina being the hardest character in the game to play by far. Setsuki, both characters are really just trying to dive kick the hell out of the other one and then mix up with throws or more dive kicks. So it's just about who gets the other one in the blender first. It might be lazy to call that 5-5, but it honestly really feels like it can go either way every time I play that. Versus Rook, very similar story to Grave. If Jaina is very meticulous about her anti-airing, about not throwing bad fireballs, being patient, like she has to mix it up. There's no guaranteed algorithm that just beats Rook. That's why it's only 6.5 rather than like 9-1. But like Rook has chances. He can find earthquakes. He can find landslides. He can even find jump-ins if he's very tricky about it. So she has to do various things. But if she sees it, reacts well, I believe she has a firm advantage there. Degray and Val, I can lump these two together. They're just too oppressive for her to deal with in neutral. Their ability to get her cornered and just bully the hell out of her is just too good. As well as the fact that they both have a super that really shuts down her offense. For Degray, it's the jump super, and for Val, it's the ground super. But it's just a nightmare. Granted, she does have the deadly offense, so she still can blow up both these characters, which is why the matchups aren't worse. But in terms of her zoning and defensive capabilities, they're just really lacking. Geiger is a very different story. However, it's still a very bad match for her. Much like Grave, she's very oppressed in neutral. Her tools simply aren't as good. However, it's slightly less bad because at least she can Dragonheart through gears if they're done from, within range. However, Geiger doesn't really need to throw those gears, which is going to force her to rely more on very tricky jumps or kind of speculative pokes. It's one of the matches where she actually has to use back A, which is kind of goofy, but she has to use back A because Geiger doesn't want to gear and because he wants to forward A. It's one of those Yomi layer situations where normally a poke that is seldom used and not very good actually comes up in this particular match. With that said, if you're relying on back A to do anything, that's probably not a good situation. So, hence the 3-7. Versus Lum, it's very interesting. Jaina doesn't get to do a lot of her normal things, so I'm sure it feels bad to most Jaina players when they're starting out or when they first fight a good Lum. But ultimately, her offense against him, combined with the power of the Dragon Heart, is just crazy. Now, obviously, this match is I rated pretty close to even, so I'm saying it's crazy, but why isn't it, more in her favor? And the reason for that is because Lum still has very legitimate chances. If he gets any reads at all, then he can build up a lot of offense pretty quickly due to Jaina's lack of a true reversal. You got to remember, her Dragonheart tool is more of a neutral bullying tool, like it shuts off melons very well. But it's not good if she's staring down a bunch of items and Lum is getting full Oki on her. Versus Arg, this is one of the harder matchups in the entire game for Argarg. Jaina, it's her best matchup easily. Basically, Dragonheart is just way too good here, combined with her Fireball and the fact that for some reason Argarg can't forward A under it, just makes this match really oppressive. He has so few options in neutral, and he pretty much is relying on tricking Jaina, baiting her into doing Dragonhearts when she shouldn't, and more or less capitalizing on mistakes. And once you're into the territory where you kind of need the opponent to make mistakes in order to have any reasonable chance, that's where you're looking into that 8+ range. So I expect an Argarg to win this match about 1 in 5 times against a good Jaina. Really, if even that. It could even be worse, but I think that's somewhere about right. So hence the 8-2 rating. Versus Quince, it's kind of a similar story to Grave, where she can't really throw fireballs and can't really do normal things, but her offense is very good against him. This one maybe, again, it's hard to say exactly where it lies, but it's somewhere around even. Quince is a very oddball character, so it can be a little hard to pinpoint his matchups. But it certainly doesn't feel overly oppressive from either side. So 5-5 is a bit more of an approximation than anything, but it's close enough. And now this is, if the Grave matchup versus Oni wasn't the most contested thing on my chart, then this certainly is. It's one of these two, or maybe both. I know a lot of people would say that Oni smokes Jaina. I just don't see it because I think her ability to pressure him is way too good for that to be the case. Combined with the Dragonheart being able to react to so many things that Onimaru does. However, I will say that it is very precise, and even though I rate this match as an advantage, it doesn't mean that an advantage is easy to realize. Like, even versus Argarg, I rate this as a huge advantage. However, if we were to play right now and I'm Argarg and you're Jaina and maybe you're not the best Jaina, you're going to get destroyed and it won't even be close, and you'll wonder how the hell this is supposed to be in her favor. I think a similar thing goes on versus Onimaru, where you really have to know what to do. You have to be precise. You have to be reacting all the time. Basically, you have to be a Jaina player, which is why there are no Jaina players. She's just very hard. But yeah, her ability to pressure and react to Dragonheart, and as well as her ground super actually having immense value versus Onimaru because his moves are so damn slow. I think it's a tough match for him. So, similar spread, although albeit a little bit weaker. She has this kind of cluster of problem matchups, and then it's kind of made up for by this huge number against Arg. I think this firmly places her in the B+ tier. It's right on the cusp of A-, but again, this set of matchups is pretty ugly. Again, the total is being padded by this number. So anytime you have 3 uglier matchups and your total is being padded by one really positive one, that's not as good as if this was like 5-5 and these were all 4-6. That would be much preferable. That would equal the same total, but that would be much better overall for her. Moving on to Midori. So now we're seeing a pretty high total here. Plus 4.5 is actually the third best in the game by my estimation for an overall spread. Versus Grave, we already talked about it. And versus Jaina, we already talked about it. So yeah, this is going to go faster and faster since anything before this black line we will have already talked about. Setsuki. So Midori versus Setsuki. The parry is so absurdly devastating if it hits, which is easier now than ever after Setsuki's jump-ins had their startups nerfed, meaning that he has even more time to react. as well as his Yomi counter, and jumping her command throw, all leading to just ridiculous round-winning offense. His expected value is just simply way too high. She actually can do a lot of mix-ups. She can do a lot of tricks. She can get off big damage sometimes. But him having 7 health and having, on average, better damage output in the matchup, as well as great tools in neutral, as well as having the ability to stop time and avoid a mix-up with the Dragon Transform, this matchup is just ridiculous. Honestly, it could be worse than this. However, I'm not willing to put it any worse than 8-2 unless I get to play it even more than I already have when I have played it a whole bunch. It's very hard, though, for Setsuki, and it's very great for Midori. Versus Rook, so I actually had a lot of help in determining how this match goes because it's not one that I participate in very much at all. However, basically the gist that I've heard from experts in the match is that it really is going to come down a lot to whether or not Midori is able to react to what Rook's doing, particularly things like earthquakes and reacting to jump-ins properly, making sure you're getting max value out of Dragon Transforms, being safe in Dragon, because if you're careless, you can get blown up as a Dragon, but it really shouldn't happen, and you can play in a way where you kind of just safely bully the Rook, and there's very little for him to do about it. Versus Degray, this match might actually be slightly Degray favored, but it's pretty darn close because ultimately Degray gets a lot of damage from simply doing neutral A, and therefore parry is very reasonable as an answer. On top of that, Degray's basic mix-up is going to be mixing in throws. So if Midori just finds a couple of Yomi counters throughout a match, it dramatically increases his win chance because he has the best Yomi counter in the game by miles and miles and miles and miles. And it's actually kind of the reason why he's as powerful as he is overall. If you just gave him an average level Yomi counter, which is silly to say because everyone's Yomi counter does the same thing. They do their normal throw damage plus give themselves super. It just so happens that Midori's normal throw does 2 damage, and his super is the hardest to charge and the most powerful. So combine those two factors, and he just has a dramatically more powerful answer to characters that rely on throws. And that's a big part of why I think this match is pretty close to even. Versus Valerie, it's very difficult for Midori in neutral. She ultimately has answers and can kind of spam everything he does. And it's up to the Midori player to either find a great parry or a very, very precise and well-timed jump A in order to really get in and make any kind of offense happen. On top of that, if he Dragon Transforms in a state where he doesn't get to immediately knock her down and start doing Oki, then he actually has a really hard time in neutral versus Val, even as the Dragon. And that's only true of a few characters. So between those two things, it's overall not very fun for him. But it could be as bad as 3-7, or it could be as mild as 4-6, depending on who you ask. I tend to lean toward the 3-7, but other people think it's more like the 4-6, so I compromise at 3.5. Versus Geiger. In theory, this match could be as even as 5-5 if the Midori was just the most precise player to ever walk the face of the earth. However, just due to ease of play, if nothing else, I have to give Geiger an advantage here. Basically, Midori has to be really precise with his ability to jump in against gears such that he won't hit Geiger, but he won't land on the gear, and Geiger won't have gear meter to flash gear, meaning he gets Geiger stuck blocking. That's kind of the crux of the neutral matchup when he's a human. And on top of that, he has the normal stuff where he can try to snipe a forward A with a parry and things like that, but obviously they're very unreliable, and anytime you press that button and it didn't work out, you're taking damage. So it's certainly not consistent and not something you want to be going for often. And when he's a dragon, he can, use the transform to get a knockdown for free and, generate some offense that way. But again, one flash gear and all of a sudden he's struggling again because one flash gear is going to lead to a cycloid revolution from Geiger, and there goes your dragon meter. And it's really not great if Geiger gets one good read. Versus Lum, this match actually, it really comes down to the fact that cakes are just so ridiculously bad for Lum in this match. It's very funny where if you just disabled cakes from being thrown in this matchup, I really think that it would either be even or maybe even Lum favored. But the cakes just help Midori so tremendously much that it's just disgusting every time. Like, especially if he's already in dragon form and he's kicking your ass, you get a little bit of breathing room, you throw an item, and you just throw the dragon a cake. You're just like, okay, well, this game's over. So really, it actually a lot of times looks like, wow, this match looks really even, or maybe even Lum favored. Like, he kind of bullies Midori a little bit and can do a lot of stuff, but then the cakes start flying, and they inevitably will. I mean, I forget what the percentage on the cake is, but it's high enough where it's gonna happen. Midori's gonna get those cakes, and you can't not throw items as Lum. That's not gonna work. You have to throw the items. So it's just unfortunate. So sometimes you'll see games where Lum throws very, very few cakes, and it looks great for him, because not only does not throwing cakes mean that Midori doesn't get that crazy advantage, but it also means that he's throwing better items that do stuff. So it's like a double advantage. Whereas in games where he throws abnormal amounts of cake, not only is he not generating any offense, but he's also making sure that Midori murders him as hard as possible. And now it might sound like I'm assuming that Midori's going to get every cake, but really Midori is excellent at advancing forward, and especially, because if Lum's throwing items that aren't threatening, Midori has no reason not to press forward. I mean, he's going to be able to just, do a jump A or walk up and do a forward A or maybe a back A. It's very hard to stop him from advancing, especially if he's reacting to your item tosses. So, hence the rating there. Versus Arg, this match it's so close to being even that it might just be 5-5. But basically the idea here is that Midori's jump-in is good enough where it really does threaten Arg all the time, and Arg does have to really wait for it and see it, otherwise he's in a lot of trouble. Midori's back A range is just long enough to really threaten Arg as well, where you can mix up between back A and a jump-in. And then, obviously, Dragon Form is scary because, anytime you can react for free, like, there's a lot of buttons that Arg can't hit in neutral. Like, if he forward A's and from any sort of mid or close range, and Midori has super meter up, he just pops it, C-throw, and, it's a night-night for Arg. However, anytime where he's not on top of Arg and kind of mixing him up, Arg gives him fits in neutral, hence the very close and even rating. Midori versus Quince. Basically, Quince and Midori have a generally similar idea of how they want to play, which is they kind of want to just do a dance in neutral, maybe get some damage here and there, and then rely on their supers to really close out rounds and close out games. However, Quince's just happens faster and more frequently, and I think that's not very specific, but in the big picture, that's really what it comes down to, is that ultimately Quince is going to always be the first to start up his BS and kind of have his way with Midori. And, okay, so really this could say 10-0, it could say 9.5, it could say whatever you want it to say. This is the hardest match in the game for Onimaru. And, in my opinion, the hardest match in the game, period, for any character. Midori's jump-ins are just way too good. They're way too fast. The character just simply doesn't have any way to deal with Midori's jump-ins. He has to do ridiculously early, nearly predictive divide and conquers. And whenever Midori has dragon form, there's just nothing Onimaru can do. He just has to sit there and pray that he somehow finds a Yomi counter or something, because you can't stop dragon from jumping in on you. You can't stop the dragon from just doing a bunch of neutral A's. And it just sucks. It just sucks really, 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 really badly. So my hat's off to anyone who can win this match versus me when I'm playing Midori. I've never seen it. It has not happened one single time yet, but I'm sure eventually it will. So, with that said, where does this place Midori overall? It's got a couple of ridiculously good matchups and not very much going on in the way of bad matchups. He's got, a few 4s, a 3.5. To me, firmly A-tier character. Moving right on to Setsuki, we have a total of -2. We've already gone over these matchups. Not looking great on this side of things. Versus Rook, basically she has to be very squirrely, fly around in the air a lot, bait Rook into committing to options with high recovery, and generally just kind of being random and just kind of capitalizing on mistakes. She can get a lot of damage against Rook, but he has a lot of life to chew through. So ultimately, the fact that she can make just 1 or 2 mistakes and die means that even though she gets to fly around in the air a lot and do all this kind of nonsense, I ultimately don't like her chances in the long run, which is why I give a slight advantage to Rook. However, it's quite playable. This is maybe the most interesting thing on this whole chart, which is that a character who is overall negative has an advantage versus a character who's massively positive, and we'll get to Degray's numbers in a minute. But the reason for this is quite simple. Setsuki just kind of owns him in the air. Degray, while he has some anti-air options, none of them work very well against Setsuki. And once he's knocked down, he has some minimal defense that he can use when he's waking up. And again, none of it happens to work against Setsuki. Now, with that said, the reason why this match isn't more in her favor is because Degray is just such a superior character overall, and he just gets so much more damage off of just literally anything that I can't possibly rate it any worse for him than this. But you will do just fine, if not even be slightly winning against Degray players if you're a top tier Setsuki. Versus Val, this is really interesting because I do believe that in theory it's even or slightly Setsuki favored. However, this rating is actually one of the cases, and this doesn't happen much on this chart, but a few times on this chart, the rating is actually genuinely influenced by the ease of execution versus the difficulty of execution. So even if, in theory, Setsuki can bully Val and do these really precise tricks to get an advantage in neutral and then to mix her up, Val's job is so much easier, like by an order of magnitude, that it's impossible for me to justify anything other than a favorable rating for her. You're going to have to outplay the Valerie many times over in order to win. And even if it's there and the ability for you to do that is there, I can't justify anything other than a favorable rating for Val at this point. However, you can certainly have success in this match with Setsuki. It's just, you really signing up for a whole lot of work. Versus Geiger. So this can be summarized very simply, which is that Flash Gear is just way too good. There's really not much to say about it other than Flash Gear owns, and as soon as you run into one Flash Gear, you're basically dead. That sounds like an exaggeration, but not only does it take all pressure off Geiger and you just took 20% of your life, but now he gets Oki on you, and you might never get out of that Oki. So combine that with the fact that you have a really hard time anti-airing his drop gears, and forward A is still a really good move. And it's just a lot of work. You have to bait the Flash Gears, and that gives Geiger all sorts of breathing room because he knows, any good Geiger is going to know that Setsuki has to bait the Flash Gears because she will die if she runs into them. So basically the risk reward is just too far in his favor. Versus Lum, certainly Setsuki's best match. Lum just has nowhere to go. The fact that her ninja port is a true 50-50 against him means that whenever you decide that you just want to meme on the Lum, you could just press that button and Lum actually has to guess, and if he guesses wrong, then he's in a whole lot of trouble because you get a hard knockdown and get to mix him up. On top of that, he's not the best at anti-airing Setsuki. He's not the best at setting up stuff against Setsuki. Her ground super really can cover a lot of ground and shut down a lot of things that normally might work. For example, if you're stuck behind a bomb and he tries to set up dice or something like that, you might be able to jump above the bomb and then throw a kunai that's going to kind of land on him while he's landing, or you might be able to ground super if the timing is wrong or if his spacing is wrong. He can't really jackpot ever because ground super will just go through all this crap and just hit him. There's a lot of things that just happen to line up favorably for her. And it also helps that she has multiple throws that happen to beat his jackpot, which is kind of his get off me move. So a lot of stuff going for her in her favor there. Versus Arg, she can get blown up really badly by Arg because back A is super good, but she has so many crazy difficult to block setups, specifically versus Arg, not only with dive kicks but with capes, that you just get so much free damage because I don't even know how the Arg's supposed to block half the shit that you can hit him with. His hurt box is very odd. It's kind of short and wide, which gives her it's like the perfect punching bag. So even though technically she's like always really threatened by him just mashing back A and maybe getting 2 damage, which is just a ridiculous chunk of her life, The fact that you get just these crazy combos on him that blow him up, and you also have enough anti-projectile tools where he doesn't really feel comfortable using his specials that much, so he's really reliant on just a couple moves. I think it gives her a small advantage. Versus Quince, you get to just kind of rush him down a little bit. You have to be really careful for the back A as well as the jump super. But other than that, that's pretty much all he has going for him in this match is back A and jump super. So if you just bait the back A's when he doesn't have super up, you just kind of maul him. And even if you get hit by the super, as long as you don't get hit by the super as a counter hit, you should be fine. So yeah, overall, it's just a simple matter of she just really gets to pressure him. And while he has answers, which is why it's not worse, the onus is really on him to find the timing and to make that happen. Versus Onimaru, this match used to be way, way, way worse before Setsuki got nerfed. And I guess technically there was a time where Oni got buffed that I didn't play because Setsuki was really bad and Oni got really good. So it was probably actually in his favor at some point, but I didn't really play during that time. But back when I played, it was very bad for him. But ever since the speed of her jump-ins got nerfed, it makes it way more realistic for him to actually anti-her with Divide and Conquer. And if she wasn't careful and tried to do something like cape into him in neutral, and then the cape, after connecting, gets canceled into a dive kick, if he Divide and Conquered that, it's going to counter hit for 2 damage and a hard knockdown. That happens once in a round, and it might be the end of the round for Setsuki. If it happens twice in a round, you're definitely dead. On top of that, he does have things like the parry into guaranteed kill, which, while it is hard for him to even get into parry stance, never mind land a parry, you steal rounds with that, and that's no joke. So if any of you aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, if you have supercharged, this works, even though I can go over this later. I'll just go over it now since I mentioned it, against basically any character without an invincible move on Wake Up. So Midori, Setsuki, Rook. I don't know if Degray can get out because even though I guess he should be able to with parry. So yeah, not Degray. Maybe meterless Degray. Same thing with meterless Valerie. Not Geiger. Lum, Argarg. Quince now. It didn't used to work against Quince, but now it does. And then I think in the mirror as well. Basically, you land a parry, you charge it up to level 3, and then you just let it go as a meaty. And they just get hit. That simple. So Setsuki has 5 life. Parry does 1 damage. So there's the other 4. Goodbye. You're just dead. It's an instant kill. As long as you learn the timing, it will literally always instant kill her. There's nothing she can do. So that's hard to land, but it is something. With that said, the reason why it's Setsuki favored is because generally she gets to apply a lot of offense, and Onimaru hates throws. She has a couple of good throws, so hence the overall advantage rating for her. So, where does that leave Setsuki overall? -2, couple of pretty rough matchups, but overall, still a respectable spread. For me, firmly B- tier. All right, moving right along, we have Rook. Overall, not looking too great over here. The total -8, pretty disastrous. Let's look. Positive match versus Degray. So once again, we have a character who's even more negative, who has a winning matchup against a very plus character. So, what's the dynamic here? Well, basically, Degray doesn't get to do anything that he normally does in matchups. Instead, he has to rely on hyper-passive poking and trying to chip away at Rook, which ultimately, I believe, given enough sample size, Rook will find an answer to. And then once he gets in, Degray has no easy way out. He really has to guess. He really has to take Rook's mix-ups. So there's going to be rounds where it looks like Degray can just shut out Rook, and it's pretty easy for him, and you'd wonder, how is it that this is Rook favored? Well, the answer is just it's a matter of the amount of interactions that have to happen before Degray can actually kill Rook. Unlike other matchups where Degray has explosive damage and can close out rounds very quickly, against Rook, it's really not the case. He really is relying on 1 damage pokes here and there. He's relying on trying to chip, with safe jump Bs and some ghosts. And it just takes a lot of time. So eventually, Rook's going to figure something out, and while obviously Degray has a chance to escape Rook's pressure if he gets into it, it's not good, and I think ultimately just in the macro, eventually Rook will come out ahead. Actually, it's literally the exact same story with Val, so I'm not even going to explain anything else because everything I just said exactly applies to Val. It's almost the same dynamic. The only difference is that Val has less life, so she's even less likely to get out, and worse wake-up options, so she's even less likely to get out than he is. But it's pretty much the same story. Versus Geiger, I mean, it's pretty simple. Geiger's just a super awesome zoner with a really consistent anti-air. Forward A is just absolutely awesome against Rook. Jump super is really good at keeping Rook away and giving Geiger space. It's just hard. It's just generically hard for him. I think this one's kind of common sense in terms of the dynamics and why it's bad. Versus Lum, Rook, he has answers to everything Lum does. However, I think that overall, I think Lum is going to end up having both an easier time and is just a little more consistent, which is funny to say because you could argue that Lum is very inconsistent. But I think he just, in general, Lum has a little bit more ways of winning neutral and forcing his way, kind of dictating the pace of the match. And while he has the same problem that we just explained with Degray and Val, of once he's in the mix-ups, he has no threatening way out. I think it's a lot harder for Rook to get him in there in the first place, especially because a lot of times if he does something like land an Earthquake, he might have landed that Earthquake because Lum just threw an item. And if that item's like a bomb or a cloud or something, well, then Lum got saved anyway. So even sometimes when Rook makes correct reads, he doesn't actually get much off of it. Versus Arg, this match is a disaster. Actually, you know what? Hold on. We're going to live edit. Boom. This match just absolutely sucks for Rook. Bubble Shield alone is just a nightmare for Rook. Like absolute just trash fire. Like it's so hard for Rook to deal with. But then you factor in that he has a really hard time getting in the first place. You have to be so precise. You have to make great reads. And ultimately, I mean, I can't even remember the last time I lost this match as Arg. It's been a long time. I mean, again, it's kind of a common sense thing, right? Like Arg's just handcrafted to just own Rook. Versus Quince. Quince has a similar problem that Degray does, which is he has to really play passively. However, that kind of fits more into Quince's general skill set and strength as a character, where he's kind of okay with being kind of stally and slow because his supers are awesome. And, you know, if you land a 2 truths or you land a counter hit jump super, that's tough for Rook to deal with. The reason why it's even, though, is because Quince has to chip away slowly, he doesn't get a lot of the explosive damage, or he doesn't get to go for the risky mix-ups nearly as much, or at least if he does go for them, it's a much higher risk than normal. You know, Rook really makes the most of that 8 life and gets a lot of opportunities to make something happen. And then versus Oni, so I used to think this match was Rook favored, but after they changed Oni's back A to give more knockback, or pushback, I guess you could say, I think it actually helped Oni a ton in this match because it lets him stay at his kind of happy zone versus Rook way more than he used to. The main thing here is that Rook doesn't have a great time in neutral, but just absolutely obliterates Oni if he gets in. And really what Oni needs to do in order to come back from it is find a Yomi counter or jump out of a command grab attempt, and then after doing something like jump C to punish the command grab, then getting the bot set up. The bots are Oni's best friend here. They are very hard for Rook to deal with, and Rook has to kind of do gimmicks that are all unreliable to deal with the bots effectively. So it's pretty much a matter of both characters can make big reads for big rewards. So where does a minus 8.5 leave us with a generally disastrous matchup spread? Well, that's firmly going to be in our C tier. However, I wouldn't put him lower than C because you play a good Rook and you'll know you can still lose. You surely can still lose. The only match that I think that Rook really doesn't have much of a shot in is versus Argarg. But against everyone else, you know, a good Rook's going to put you through your paces for sure. All right, moving right along, we have Degray at a monstrous +9. All of these matches are looking great. We've already gone over them. A couple minorly unfavored ones, but I mean, still, they're basically even. Versus Val, so this match is pretty heavily contested and debated. These are the 2 most powerful characters in the game. I tend to believe that Val has a slight advantage in the head-to-head, but it does require some very precise anti-airing on her end, as well as being tricky with her movement. But, you know, Degray has just such great damage. and great options in general, that he still has a fighting chance all the time. And I actually think it's one of the better matches in the game, honestly. I think it's pretty interesting to play. And I'm very glad that of the top tier characters, there's one match that's relatively close and very fun to play. So I think that's a great thing, because a lot of times top tier versus top tier can be pretty toxic or lopsided. So in this case, the fact that the two best characters, when they go head to head, have a close and interesting match is, I think, great. Versus Geiger, I don't know where other people fall in this one, but it's certainly roughly even. Basically, the idea here is that Geiger is better at dealing with the oppression of Ghost than the other zoners are. He has tricks like forward A to eat the Ghost while he has a gear coming toward Degray, because then Degray can't he can't actually punish the fact that Geiger just got grabbed by the Ghost because there's a gear coming at him. So it basically, it's kind of like a similar thing that Lum can do against Degray, which we'll get to in a second, I suppose. But it's a very useful trick, and it helps a lot with you actually be able to keep Degray at bay and keep him honest as Geiger. The reason it's even is because Degray has all of his usual tools. They work here. It's just that Geiger is just so generically powerful and has such a great reversal, has great frame data, that it ends up just being roughly even. Versus Lum, the Ghost is just too good against Lum. If you're not careful, he can do the exact same trick that I just explained with Geiger, where if he has a mini Lum out and you try to throw the Ghost to eat the mini Lum, he can walk in front of the Ghost or punch it or whatever he wants to do, such that Lum gets grabbed by the Ghost, but now there's a mini Lum in your way, so you can't actually punish it. So you have to play around that. You have to understand that that's going to happen. But luckily, your jump A is just so obscenely good, as well as just being able to generally get really good damage against Lum from a lot of situations. Back A is, I think, this is one of the matchups where it really shines, because not only can it kill mini Lums, but Lum pretty much is going to have to jump in order to punish it. And it's just very scary for Lum to jump in on Degray, because you run into that jump super, especially if you press the button and you take 3. Like that round's going to be over almost every time. The jump super is just so good for Degray. Versus Arg, you're noticing a trend here where Degray beat zoners. Kind of getting tired of repeating myself, but yeah, so Arg doesn't have any reliable way of keeping him out. Arg's going to get cornered, and really it's up to Bubble Shield and Back A to save the day. I don't really have much more to say than that. I mean, it's kind of all common sense and rudimentary. Whoops. Definitely not 0. That was a typo. Try to hit the arrow. Versus Quince. So pretty much Degray just has better buttons. He's just faster. The one thing that Quince has going for him is that in the Battle of the Jump Supers, Quince's happens to have a better hitbox, and it will generally win the exchange against Degray's. So at least when Quince has super meter, he has air superiority. If it wasn't for that, this match would probably be a lot worse. But that is actually a pretty big deal. But it's hard to mix up Degray. He just does more damage. It's pretty. And the Ghost, you notice don't have any answer for the Ghost really. So just a bit of an advantage there. Might even be a little worse than this, honestly. Actually, no, we're gonna do another live edit. I'm pretty sure it's more like 6.5. Cool. Versus Onimaru, again, Degray's jump A is so good. It gives Onimaru fits. The Ghost is really annoying for Onimaru. He can spin through with his B slash, but that's just really predictable, and it just leaves him really open. Like if Degray does counterpoint step while you're doing the spinning slash, then you're kind of in a mix-up where he can just not follow it up and throw you if you try to parry, or if you do anything other than parry, he can do any number of attacks that are all going to blow you up. It's very frustrating, and Onimaru really just has to be precise and outread the Degray a lot to win. It's doable, but it's hard. So I don't think anyone needs to guess here or have any ambiguity about where Degray is going in the tier list here. Bada bing, bada boom. I didn't actually plan on this, all these characters being in different tiers, but that's very aesthetically pleasing. So moving right along to, what is this? 11.5 overall, huh? Well, there's only 11 matchups. 11.5 overall means that she's averaging a 6-4 matchup and change against the entire cast, which is preposterous. And if we look, her only losing matchup is barely losing to Rook. Also preposterous, especially because Rook is one of the weakest characters in the game. So, yeah, I'll go over the matchups just to say I did, but I mean, we all know where this is going. That's the best character in the game right there. It's just really nothing to say. So against Geiger, yeah, actually, wait, this is wrong. This is supposed to be like that. Boom. So it's even more disgusting. It's plus 12. I forgot to edit that. Well, look, that's why we're doing this live, folks. You know, you never know what you're going to find. Basically, while he has tools to everything, to answer everything she does, ultimately, I think the thing that really breaks it open is Geiger just really struggles to deal with her super. He can't really press any buttons against it, and she's generally good at cornering him. So whenever you get Geiger in the corner, you get 2 damage super, and that damage just adds up really quickly. And unlike Setsuki, where you can reasonably react to her things and then flash gear, versus Valerie, sometimes you're more just completely guessing and hopes of flash gearing something, but without any real consistency. So while it's really not that bad, and Geiger certainly stands a fair chance, ultimately I think she will end up winning in the long run. Versus Lum, the forward A nerf, or bug fix, I mean, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. It's still ultimately a nerf. Actually helped Lum a lot here because forward A was just so bad for him before, where now he can actually throw it, which is really fantastic. It really helps him in the match. Ultimately, though, she still has the ability to just pressure the hell out of him. The trick here is that it's actually very precise for Valerie, and it really requires you to be reacting to what you're doing and seeing what's happening. For example, an interaction that happens all the time against Lum is that you go to Cyan in neutral, and he happened to jump. So you hit him out of the air, and he flips out. If you don't react to that and stop your sequence, then he's going to throw you and reverse all the pressure. And if that happens just a couple times in a match, you're going to throw away rounds. So instead, you need to just react, stop your Rekka chain, let him whiff that throw, and then get 2 more damage. And it's a whole different match when you do that properly. There's a few other interactions like that as well, like making sure you rainbow through melons, and a couple other things that a lot of Valerie players really struggle to do. But as long as you're executing at the top of your game, heavily in Val's favor. Versus Arg, this rating might be a little aggressive for some people, but from everything I've seen, she just simply has better options, and very similarly to Geiger, it's that ground super. The ground super sucks so bad for Arg, it's just not even funny. Not only does it just completely own him in neutral, and he just can't press anything against it, but it's safe even if you just randomly do it for no reason and it doesn't happen. Like he doesn't even get a direct damage off of it. And granted, he gets her to block a forward A, which is good because then he gets a river up generally. But it's just so bad. It's so frustrating. The only reason it's not worse is because Bubble Shield's awesome, and Jump B for Arg is pretty darn good in the matchup too. But part of what makes it worse than a normal rushdown matchup is that back A isn't even that great because you have to be incredibly precise with your back A. And unlike other characters who maybe can't even punish a whiff back A, Valerie sure can punish a whiff back A. So for 2 damage even. So yeah, it's just really hard. Versus Quince, Quince is he's just too slow. He just gets mauled. The only reason it's not worse is because he can have explosive rounds, and if he gets 2 truths up, that's really bad for Valerie. But anytime he doesn't have super, anytime he doesn't get 2 truths up, he's just getting mauled. It's very straightforward. Versus Oni, it's really interesting. This is the one match in the game where if you don't like rolling dice, then you definitely can't play Onimaru, because his genuine game plan here is to just randomly divide and conquer all the goddamn time. If you counter hit Val, you get that 2 damage and that hard knockdown. It's so rewarding that it's literally worth just going for. You're going to take 2 damage as a punish because you're going to fail all the time. But when it works, it really works. So it's genuinely worth it. It feels bad. I don't enjoy playing it as Onimaru, but there's something to it. So yeah, that's my advice. If you're getting owned as Onimaru against Valerie's, just divide and conquer. Just randomly, just do it. Even if you don't know why, just do it. And it really will help you. All right, going on to Geiger. So what's really fascinating about Geiger is that if we look at this is all looking insane. This is looking like a super top tier character. But then we go over here and we're like, whoa, what happened? Versus Lum, he sucks at clearing mini Lums. And he actually is not the best at pressuring Lum. He's got some options. Forward A is still just such an awesome button, and drop gear is such an awesome button that Geiger's never going to struggle too bad in any matchup, well, except the next one. But those two buttons are always great, and he definitely has chances against Lum. But it's not easy because Lum can amass items pretty consistently, and then you're going to get cornered as Geiger, and once Lum has Geiger cornered, that's not a fun situation to be in. So overall, not very good for him. Versus Arg, I have no idea what Geiger is supposed to do to beat Arg. Forward A goes under your gears, and then from farther distances, he can actually bluefish to eat your gear and be safe. So he just punches you from full screen for damage and doesn't even get hit back. Poison's really frustrating for Geiger to deal with. Geiger's really only reprieve here is that his super can turn off some of Arg's options, but the thing is, Arg doesn't even really need to do stuff. Like, he can just do nothing. Like, back A is so good against Geiger. Like, match just sucks. Like, it's really bad for Geiger. I think maybe back in the day we thought it was less bad, but that probably had something to do with the fact that Geiger used to get 2 damage off his super. Now that he only gets 1, it's just miserable. Versus Quince, Geiger really struggles in neutral here. He can't throw gears like at all because the mini mirrors from Quince they just take care of that. And it turns out Geiger is incredibly bad at dealing with his own gears. Sometimes you might be able to throw another gear, but in which case you've achieved absolutely nothing, which is a detriment to you because Quince just dramatically gets stronger with meter compared to Geiger. So you really can't afford to just sit there and do nothing. So throwing gears is pretty much out as a concept. You really can't do it except maybe in very, very fringe situations. So what does that leave you with? Well, it leaves you with forward A, which is a great button, but that's pretty much all you got. And back A for Quince can really own that. So it's just hard. It's hard to play neutral. You have flash gear, but there's plenty of ways that if Quince gets 2 trues where he can kind of work around the flash gear. It's just not a fun match for Geiger. Versus Oni, this is, if not the other 2 zoners, then this is going to be the most contentious matchup on this chart. So yeah, a lot of people think that Oni beats all the zoners, but I think that all those zoner players are just bad, and that they all beat Oni. I think forward A is way too good, like just ridiculously too good against Oni for it to be Oni favored. And again, Oni can get the 4 damage super trade if Geiger throws a fireball, but why are you throwing bad fireballs? I don't know. To me, that's just bad play. So I don't know. If we want to say that if you play bad, then it's bad for you, well, yeah, I would agree. So where does this leave Geiger? Well, he's got a very volatile match spread. He's got a lot of really strong matchups and then some really iffy ones. But overall positive. To me, firmly A-. Now, with that said, he doesn't feel A- in a lot of his matchups. But again, this is why tier lists are not perfect. Because when you're playing any of this stuff, Geiger is super mega awesome. But when you're playing this, Geiger is in the trash can. So, this is abstract average. You know what I mean? Okay, moving on to Lum. So we have a not so flashy -5. Already talked about all these matchups. Not looking too great here. We got some pretty low numbers over here. And then versus Arg. So versus Arg, pretty much it comes down to the fact that Arg can deal with all of Lum's items and Lum's dice. The only real threat that Lum has is lightning clouds and fireworks. That's really where Lum makes all of his progress. If you don't get lightning clouds and fireworks, or you don't absolutely capitalize on them to try to get Arg into the corner, then you're just going to get destroyed in neutral. You can try jumping in bravely or rolling in bravely, which you kind of have to mix in because you have nothing else to do. But it's really going to come down to, can you get some lightning clouds and some fireworks? And if you don't, then it's just miserable. Versus Quince. Quince doesn't really have any good way to stop Lum from throwing items. He doesn't really have any good way to stop Lum from just building up momentum. He kind of has to play very aggressively, which is really not his strength. So ultimately, and also things like roll are pretty annoying for Quince to deal with. Like, yes, he can technically back A it or throw it, but there's a lot of precision there, and at the end of the day, from some ranges, it's just flat out guessing. So anytime there's guessing involved, like let's say you're close enough where Quince would have to blindly back A your roll, and you just threw an item instead. Well, now you just safely threw an item for free, and it's probably threatening because it's probably pretty close to the Quince. That's just not a good situation to be in for Quince at all. And various interactions like that happen constantly. So it's just very hard for Quince, very good for Lum. Versus Oni, Onimaru actually has answers to everything Lum does, more or less, but it's just a matter of Lum, much like Grave, he can mix up offense and defense in a way where, or I guess you could say pressure and zoning, because it's technically all offense, but basically he could sit back, throw items, go in with jump-ins, and mix it up, as well as really getting to abuse items and the fact that they do extra hits to break armor. It just means that Oni is just always on the back foot. He's always reacting. And even though he has some things going for him where this match is definitely not insurmountable, I think in the long run, Lum wins. With that said, where does an overall -5 and a pretty iffy spread leave him? I think firmly B-. Not so weak where you couldn't expect to win with him, but probably not your best bet. Moving on to Argarg. Pretty respectable matchup spread. Is slightly negative. The Jaina match we knew was really bad. The Val match, not very fun. Quint's match. So basically, Quint, back A and Bubble Shield are just absolute nightmares for Quint. He has to do very precise back A's or very tricky, whatever the hell the B kick is called. I don't even know what the hell that move's called. Seeing double, that's what I call it. In order to pressure Argarg at all. When he has super, he can maybe get stuff done, but again, Bubble Shield's pretty good, so it's not a good match for Quince. He just gets walled really hard. And unlike the other zoner matchups where the mirror kind of helps shut off the zoning, Arg can just throw poison at him and then set up rivers. So that doesn't really work either because you can't reflect poison, and then the rivers, I mean, yeah, you can reflect the goldfish, but he doesn't have to throw the goldfish at your mirror. So it's just, yeah, his usual kind of stalling tricks don't really work. So just a hard match. And then the second worst matchup in the game, maybe it's actually the worst matchup in the game, honestly. I think that these are both, you know what, why am I beating around the bush here? Let's just call a spade, shall we? These are impossible, so I'm going to rate them as such. I genuinely don't think Argarg can beat a good Onimaru. I don't think it's possible. I really don't. Basically, Onimaru has just way too many buttons that just absolutely smash Arg. To the point where it's just stupid. Ground super, just anything you thought you were doing, ground super just erases that off the face of the earth. There's just nothing you can do. From any range, it just punishes you and removes all your poison if you try to do that. You're immediately in the corner. You're just screwed. Like, I don't know. Like, you have to do just wild gimmicks and pray. And, yeah, you might get some rounds like that. But is that a winning strategy? Are you going to actually take games and matches? No, you're not. So, yeah, good luck. So, what's funny, just for the sake of illustrating this, if this was just even a normal fair match, look at Arg's total. So, with that said, where does this leave Arg? This match is dragging his score down, and this one too, dragging his score down so badly that I am actually willing to kind of go on a limb here. And instead of putting him in B+, I'm going to put him in A-, simply because even though these are averages, and technically Jaina's average was considerably better than his, just for a second, just imagine these. Oh, whoops, I screwed that up. I wasn't supposed to edit those. Or I wasn't supposed to edit this one. I was supposed to edit this. Like that. So just look at this. If we change 2 matches, he is insanely plus. So this is really more of a judgment call for me, but I do think that Argarg is overall a better character than Jaina, even though there's these 2 matchups that are just absolutely hideous for him. So again, the total isn't everything. The context matters. However, if we were ordering these by tier, I do think that Argarg is firmly at the bottom of this tier, and you reasonably could put him here. If we're going just strictly by the totals, then obviously he belongs here, or even here. But I'm kind of going with a judgment call here, and putting him in A minus. Quince, only matchup we haven't talked about is versus Oni. It's a little tricky because Divide and Conquer can blow Quince up. However, as long as you don't run into too many of those, you're pretty much sitting pretty. It's a pretty straightforward match where Quince just is trying to poke safely, get his supers going, and kind of just do normal things. It's pretty ordinary in that sense. And ultimately, minus 4.5, but with a lot of gimmicks, a lot of tricks, and not the absolute worst in terms of the spread. I think, for me, firmly B minus tier. And then, do we need to say anything about this? I mean, this is a disaster. Even if we include this, it's a disaster. If we took this away, it's beyond a disaster. Clearly the worst character in the game. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it interesting or maybe learned something. And if you have any questions or ever want to play, just hit me up. I've been Aphotics, and thank you for watching.